I've lived in Whispering Pines for the better part of 27 years. Long enough to see the old oaks grow fat and the HOA presidents grow mean. Long enough to know when something doesn't belong and when someone deserves better than. That's what this story is really about. A woman who was underestimated. A woman they called just a housewife, till she made a noise so loud the whole county had to listen. Her name was Martha Boleyn. Most folks didn't know her by name. She kept quiet. Didn't go to the potlucks, never spoke at the board. Meetings, wore plain clothes. Carried a canvas purse, she probably sewed herself. Her lawn was tidy, her mailbox the right shade of beige. Her roses bloomed like they'd been trained in military formation. You wouldn't look twice at her unless you knew what to look for. And me, I did, because I used to know that look, the one behind her eyes, the quiet steel. The kind that don't rattle easy but strikes when it counts. Back in my Marine days, we called folks like her sleepers. Still on the outside. Coiled tight on the inside, and buddy, when they decide to move, you'd better stand clear. It all started at the Whispering Pines Community Gun Day. Now, before you roll your eyes, no, this wasn't some wild backwoods shootout. This was a regulated, board-approved, overly color-coded event held at the range just past the HOA garden plots. Every year, the board called it a celebration of tradition. But really, it was just another excuse for Brad Fisher, the HOA vice president and self-proclaimed retired marksman champion, to show off in front of his little fan club of clipboard-carrying Karens and plastic patriots. That year, they put up flyers reading, HOA Shooting Exhibition Residents. Welcome. Bring your own gear. Witness greatness. Compete if you dare. It was all fluff. Nobody really competed. The range rules were locked tighter than a tax audit. Brad controlled the timer, the targets, even the scorecards. The man wore Oakleys like they were surgically attached. And he always carried that stainless steel pistol with pearl grips like it was some family heirloom. It wasn't. I knew the man who sold it to him on clearance. Anyway, folks showed up. Lawn chairs, lemonade, kids running around. Current-style women with sun visors and firm opinions about mulch. Brad stood on the firing line like General Patton, barking safety rules with too much volume and not enough sense. I watched from a bench near the trees, arms crossed, sipping coffee, same as I did every year. Then Martha showed up. She wasn't on the sign-up list, didn't come with a crew. Just stepped out of her faded Ford with a beat-up range bag slung over her shoulder, and it looked like she'd just finished folding laundry. Her hair was pulled back in one of those no-nonsense buns. She nodded politely to the folks near the parking area and made her way to the sign-in table. That's when the first eyebrow lifted. Then the whispering started. She's not going to shoot, is she? She doesn't even own a gun, does she? Oh Lord, what is she wearing? Looks like a baking apron. I watched Brad turn, his sunglasses already locked onto her like a hawk spotting a rabbit in church. Can I help you, ma'am? He asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, she said. I'd like to register for the open shoot. Ain't. Pause. He actually laughed. I'm sorry, this isn't. It's not a demonstration event. It's competition grade. For trained residents? Martha blinked slowly. And I'm a resident. It's been one for 22 years, same as you. He cleared his throat, looked her up and down like he was inspecting a Halloween costume. Do you have your own weapon? Yes, she said. In the bag. And you've trained with it? She smiled just slightly. Let's say I've had some practice. Now, Brad didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone he didn't consider a real shooter, but the bylaws were clear. Open competition. No pre-qualifications. And after some passive-aggressive mumbling, he reluctantly waved her through. She picked lane 5, dead center of the range. She moved slow, precise, like she'd done it 100 times. Laid out her gear carefully. Old revolver, polished but worn. Looked like a .357 Colt Python vintage, not tactical. Something you'd expect from a retired sheriff, not a suburban widow. I leaned forward. Something about the way she handled that gun made my gut go tight, not fear, respect. It's the same feeling I used to get right before a combat drill with live rounds. She didn't posture, didn't ask questions. She checked her sight line, adjusted her stance, and waited. Brad strutted to the firing station like a peacock with something to prove. "All right, folks," he said. "Let's welcome our last-minute contestant, Martha. Something or other. She's gonna give it a go, I guess." A few laughs, a few uncomfortable chuckles. Martha said nothing. She just squared her shoulders and faced the line. Target, 75 feet, 10 rounds, standing no rests, no scopes. The HOA record. 91 points. Brad's, he mentioned it at least 4 times already. Martha waited for the tone, beep, and then crack. That first shot echoed like thunder in a quiet valley, dead center, right through the bullseye. Brad blinked. I didn't. I saw the stance. The breathing, the recoil control. She wasn't aiming, she was calculating. Crack, 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 every shot like clockwork. When the 10th bullet hit, the silence was thick enough to chew. The range officer walked out, pulled the target, held it up. Everyone leaned in, a gasp. Then another. 10 holes. All within the red ring. 2 in the exact same center mark. Final score, 98. New HOA. Record. Brad looked like someone had just unplugged his ego. Karen, number 3, dropped her lemonade. One of the neighbor boys whispered, "That grandma's got aimbot." Revolver packed her bag and said, "Thank you for letting me participate." And then she walked back to her truck like nothing happened. I followed her to the parking lot. She saw me and gave a faint smile. "You knew," she said, almost sheepish. "I suspected," I replied. "You don't hold a weapon like that without dancing with it first." She chuckled. "Yeah, I used to shoot competitive. Back before the kids. National circuit. Even trained recruits during Gulf War. Does Brad know that?" She shrugged. "He never asked." And that was the beginning of the end for HOA. Ego hour. But what came after? That's where it gets real, because breaking Brad's record didn't just embarrass him, it threatened him. And when insecure men get threatened, they reach for rules, petty ones, punishing ones, the kind that say, "You embarrassed me. Now I'll remind you who's in charge." And next week. That's exactly what Brad did. He declared Martha non-compliant with HOA safety ordinances, said her range activity was a community concern. And what followed wasn't just about a gun range. It was about identity, respect. In the moment of quiet, a woman decided she'd had enough. 3 days after Martha's shot heard round the neighborhood, she received a folded notice duct taped to her mailbox. Notice of violation, Whispering Pines HOA. I remember the wind had picked up that morning, and the tape was flapping like a desperate flag. I found her staring at it quietly, her coffee cooling in her hand, lips pressed tight in that way country folks do when they're fighting the urge to say something sharp. I walked up and asked, "What's the offense? Too many bullseyes?" Didn't laugh, just handed me the paper. Resident has violated HOA ordinance, 1 to be safety. Regulations pertaining to private ownership and use of firearms within HOA-approved zones. Additional complaints submitted regarding noise disturbances and unsafe behavior. Under it was Brad Fisher's signature, looped with unnecessary flair like he thought he was signing the Constitution. Martha looked at me and said, "He's trying to scare me. He's trying to erase you," I said by the next week. Things escalated. Fast. Suddenly Martha had a fine for excessive target practice, even though the range was community access and she hadn't been there since the event. Then her backyard flagpole was deemed structurally questionable. Her garden hose was non-compliant. The kicker, her birdbath. Yes, birdbath was now a breeding ground for potential mosquito infestation. It was laughable, except it wasn't, because the more they pushed, the more obvious it became. This wasn't about her property. It was about power. About Brad being humiliated in front of his HOA loyalists. And about Karen. Yes, Karen capital. Kate, at her real name was Diana Tompkins, but everyone knew her as Karen of the Pines. HOA secretary. Sunglasses always on her head. Spoke in full paragraphs of passive aggression. She'd been trying to run the HOA ever since her third husband retired early. and she needed something else to control. Karen took over where Brad left off, walking by Martha's home daily, phone in hand pretending to document violations. One day, she stood right outside Martha's fence, peering through the slats with her little dog barking beside her. "You know," she said loudly, "some people think this neighborhood was better before certain types started showing up with guns." Martha stepped out onto her porch, calm as ever. "I've lived here since 1996, Diana. You moved in last June," Karen scoffed. "Well, not all change is improvement." That night, a formal hearing notice was delivered to Martha's door. HOA. Disciplinary review. Subject: community endangerment. Behavior unbecoming of a resident. Potential for revocation of membership. In other words, they were trying to kick her out. Now, let me pause right here. Because in any normal world, this would be laughable. But in HOA land, especially one like Whispering Pines, those bylaws can get twisted tighter than a rattlesnake in a Coke can. They'll cite a flower being 2 inches too tall if it gets them leverage. But Martha? She didn't flinch. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat down at her kitchen table, pulled out an old metal filing box, and laid out paperwork so thick you could use it as insulation, property deed, range access charter, HOA original covenant agreement. A document proving that the shooting range itself was co-founded by her late husband and a local sheriff back in 1991, with permanent member privileges signed and noted. In short, she outranked them. But the problem with people like Karen and Brad is, even when they're wrong, they won't admit it. They double down. And on hearing day, that's exactly what they did. The meeting was held at the clubhouse. Hardwood floors, framed vision statements on the wall, fold-out chairs that creaked when anyone over 40 sat down. The board sat like royalty, Karen in the center, Brad flanking her and 2 silent nodders on either side. The room had a few residents, mostly rubberneckers who'd heard the rumors and wanted front row seats for whatever drama unfolded. Martha walked in dressed plain, same calm energy she always carried. I walked in behind her. She didn't ask me to, but I wasn't about to let them corner her alone. Karen cleared her throat and launched right in. "This is not a criminal court," she said, "but we are tasked with preserving the harmony of our community, and some recent behaviors have disrupted that harmony." Martha raised an eyebrow. "By harmony, you mean you losing a shooting match?" Brad spoke next. "This isn't personal. It's about rules. It's about safety. A neighbor saw you handling weapons in your backyard. That's not approved range space." Martha pulled a paper from her folder. "According to Section 8A of the 2002 amended bylaws, which you clearly haven't read, residents are allowed private training on their own property as long as it's within decibel and boundary limits." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. I grinned. Brad tried again. "But it makes people uncomfortable. We've had ... complaints." "From who?" Martha asked. "Name one neighbor besides her." She nodded at Karen, who filed a complaint. Dead silence. Someone in the audience whispered, "Y'all are making fools of yourselves." Karen turned red. Brad stammered, "We don't disclose names for privacy reasons." Martha leaned forward. "I've lived here longer than every person on this board. I helped build this community. My husband helped build that range. And I'll be damned if I let 2 clowns and clipboards erase me from my own home." It was quiet enough to hear the ice melt in someone's sweet tea. Karen slammed a hand on the table. "You're out of order." Martha stood. "You're out of your depth." Adjourned without a ruling, a rare thing. The audience clapped as she left, but the damage was done. The board couldn't kick her out legally. They tried another route, social freeze out. People stopped waving. The HOA newsletter accidentally left her name off community notices. She wasn't invited to the 4th of July barbecue. Brad made comments at meetings like some people just don't respect the community anymore. But here's the thing. Truth doesn't fade, and neither does quiet strength. One afternoon, while I was fixing a loose board on my fence, I heard a familiar crack echo from the range. Followed by 3 more, I smiled. She was still practicing. And then something unexpected happened. One by one, the old guard started visiting her. Quietly, privately, dropping off zucchini bread, asking for garden tips, talking about their kids. One even asked her to teach his granddaughter how to shoot. Martha never bragged, never gloated, but her presence grew stronger, more respected. And then came the final blow, the one that shook Whispering Pines to its little manicured core. 1 week before the next HOA board election, new flyer went out, announcing candidacy for Whispering Pines HOA president, Martha Belling. Preserve dignity, respect legacy, end petty politics. The flyer was plain, but it hit like thunder. Brad's face reportedly turned purple. Karen was seen stomping through the rose garden like a toddler in a tiara. But me, I just poured another coffee, sat on my porch, and waited for the fireworks. Because the best part wasn't the drama. It was knowing the votes were coming. And Martha, she had more than just a revolver now. She had a neighborhood behind her election. Day dawned soft and golden, the kind of morning that tricks you into thinking the world is fair and calm. But I knew better. So did the people of Whispering Pines. The clubhouse parking lot was packed. Cars lined the street all the way past the tennis courts. Folks who hadn't shown up to a community meeting in years came out in button-ups and ball caps, some even with lawn chairs and thermoses like it was tailgate day. But this wasn't about a cookout. It wasn't even about the HOA. It was about Martha and a choice between fear and respect. Brad stood near the entrance in a polo 2 sizes too tight, trying to shake hands like a greasy politician. Karen hovered beside him, flipping through clipboards, acting like her clipboard might cast votes for her. But the real line formed near the front table, where Martha stood beneath the whispering oak that had grown taller than most of the houses here. She didn't wave campaign signs. She didn't pander. She just stood there smiling, in a plain blue shirt, nodding kindly as folks came up to her. "Morning, Martha," one man said. "Never thought I'd vote in one of these things, but you gave me a reason." "About time someone with sense ran," said another. Brad tried to hold ground. But even the HOA faithful couldn't deny the shift. His jokes weren't landing. Karen kept checking her watch like time owed or something. And when the final ballot was cast, the room fell into a silence so thick you could have cut it with a letter opener. The board secretary, bless her nerves, walked to the mic, cleared her throat, and read the results. Total votes, 128. Brad Fisher, 39. Martha Belling, 89. Effective immediately. Martha Belling is the new HOA president of Whispering Pines. You could hear someone exhale in relief, someone else clapped, then another. And within seconds, the whole room was on their feet. Not because they hated Brad, not even because they loved HOA politics, but because a quiet woman stood her ground. And one Karen stormed out first, heels clicking like gunshots on marble. Brad followed, face pale, muttering something about rigged votes and outsider meddling, but no one listened. Their noise had finally run out of echo, and Martha, she stood at the front of that room and said the only thing she needed. 2. I didn't run for power. I ran to protect what we built here, our homes, our peace, and the dignity of our neighbors. Thank you for reminding me that quiet voices still count. I walked with her to her truck after the meeting. The air smelled of fresh pine and distant rain. She looked tired, not defeated, just human, real. I think I might need your help fixing some of the nonsense they passed last year, she said. I'd be honored, I replied. Also, if you ever open a shooting school, I'll be your first student, she chuckled, adjusting her bag. You're too old and too proud. Exactly, I said. That's why I'd fit in. The weeks after were different. Whispering Pines softened a bit. The newsletter changed tone, more neighborly, less threatening. Fines were reviewed, some even refunded. Martha held open meetings that weren't just symbolic, they were actually helpful. She removed the rule that said lawn chairs had to match siding color. She reinstated the range charter in its original form, and she made a latest statement that still echoes. In the community's heart, skill is not a threat, silence is not weakness, and age is not irrelevance. One Saturday, near sunset, I wandered down to the range just to walk off some old knee pain. As I got closer, I heard that same familiar crack echo through the trees. There she was, Martha, standing steady in lane 5. Same revolver, same calm face. But this time, she wasn't alone. 3 young girls stood beside her, watching carefully. She'd just finished a shot, and one of them asked, "Was that hard to do?" Martha reloaded, nodded once, and said, "Only if you forget who you are." That line stuck with me, because that's what Whispering Pines almost did. They forgot who they were. Decent folks who respect each other, who let people live how they choose, as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. It took a woman who everyone thought was just a quiet widow to remind them that strength doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just hits the mark when it counts. I still see her sometimes. We wave. She brings me tomatoes. I fix her fence when it leans too hard. The board still exists, but it runs smoother now. Less fear, less nonsense. As for Brad and Karen, they moved to neighborhoods over, last I heard. Karen filed a noise complaint. About a rooster, the rooster won. Poetic. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around. I've got more wild HOA tales coming your way. Thanks for listening, neighbor.